Hello and welcome to my new update video on the next part of my learning to draw in VR. So this time, this was done the 12th of April, the notes, but this time we're talking about the third grid in the brushes panel. So here, was it this? Yeah, the third grid. So here you can see 1, 2, 3. So it's, oh yeah, that's why I got confused. So this is the group of brushes. The first one being the coarse bristles. So throughout, like the last ones, I'm going to try to explain and show what I wrote as notes. So this one, here you can see it. It gives brush strokes as if grass textured or even fur. I would say even more fur than grass. So maybe this would look really good around an animal or like an animal like sculpture, you could say. But it's a very sort of thick, although see-through, it sort of has like this thick touch to it. Well, mostly rough. That's probably the best way to say it. Anyway, the next one is Dr. Wiggles. So this is a very unique one because it animates a lot. It's very animated. And it's, yeah, you animate a brush and gives a feeling of motion. So this could be useful, let's say, for water. If you're making a river, especially with this color it fits, it feels like the water's flowing. So anyway, that's a very useful one because it's very animated and still very full. The middle is not very, it's still quite, you could say thick. Also, I was gonna say the coarse bristles have the texture. Okay, so electricity is the next one, and this very similar to, well, actually, it's very similar to maybe embers. It's a very animated and realistic, you could say, look, especially when you go with a similar color to yellow and quite bright. Like that looks like a thunderbolt. And you can see it's again pinched on both sides like most of these brushes. And if you go like slow, it's much thicker. If you go fast, it's spread out. So it depends on the way you move, which is also a unique thing about this. Some paintbrushes don't actually, like when you go slow or fast, it doesn't make a difference, but this one it does. So you can see it's a very abstract, a very animated and moving electricity bolt. If you change like between darker, it's very dark, surprisingly dark. So this could give you something that you wouldn't think of as a lightning bolt, but could give you something unique, a special effect, rather than using such a glowy, outstanding brush. Streamers is the next one. Let's go with the normal color. So this one. So this is basically sort of looks like a set of maybe meteors. 5 rows, they're in 5 rows. And they're quite, let me read what I said. I said they're quite sparse. So you can see that they're quite spread out away from each other. There's a lot of gaps. It's like a long line of moving things in one direction, always in the direction of where you draw. And of course you can see the angle, so it also curves. It's in a straight line. It's not a sphere, or it's not a circle when looking at this angle. And yeah, I think this is also a very useful one, because I don't know, it's a very unique effect. Though you can see the waves. The front of it always glows a lot. Well, depending how bright, but it usually glows. Whereas the back, the tail, is less and less dark and less glowy. So that's the streamers. Let me just read what I said. Yeah, they have a fading tail, as I said. So hypercolor. This is this one. This is probably one of the weirdest ones, because it's a large range. It's almost like the rainbow. Did we already do the rainbow? Yeah. It's almost like the rainbow. The way like it's much more. It's usually darker, as you can see. Oh wait, sorry, I had the rainbow on. Let me get back. Let's try with a dark one. You can see there is literally, I think, no difference between the dark and the light, or maybe slight difference here. You can see an illumination, but this color scheme is very, very similar no matter what darkness. And this is especially thick. You can see it reminds me of one of the first brushes, maybe like, yeah, oil paint. You can see that there's a strong texture to this as well as this, except this has illuminating colors. And the end's also very similar. So yeah, this is a really unique one too if you want a more colorful drawing. And it cycles through a series of colors, as you could see. Oh, let me get back. Yeah, usually like the main colors like blue, red, green, all those colors, yellow. Um, Bubbles. So this one's one I would say of a set between the embers and the snow, maybe the stars, because if you think about the embers, they were rising, snow falls. Bubbles, the interesting thing is they stay in the same place, and you can see they're very spread out as well. But I mean, you can always change the fact that they're spread out by drawing the same spot more and more and more, and that's how you make more spread out things more dense. Um, yeah. Also, maybe a good point is if you make it larger, then they are more spread out, just bigger. Anyway, what I want to say is the reflection looks the same from every angle. If you look here, like the bottom left and top right, the reflection is the same, and the outer illumination as well. So yeah, as I was gonna say, there's a little glow on the outside, a little line of the color, whereas the inside is very see-through. You could literally see the text from here through the bubble. Yeah, and they just wobble around slowly, just like you would think, like sort of the feel of bubbles are like happy, like relaxed, you could say. It's this sort of vibe. And an interesting thing is that when you make dark bubbles, they're gone. They're almost just dots of reflections, because the outside don't have basically any reflection. It's just the inside reflection of the dots. So this is a very unique way you can make bubbles look very different between dark and light. Neon pulse. Let me get back to the center. So the neon pulse is the next one. Here you can see there's a very light. It's hard to see maybe, but there's a very light. Here you can see it well. What did I read? So you can see a gray translucent tube of light. Of the light path. So this is a gray translucent tube. You can see through it, but you can see that it's there. So that's one aspect of this brush. And then there's this obvious light coming every second or so, I said. Which is non-textured. It's just a bright light, which is bright on the front and the back. Relatively wide. It depends on the size. So a tiny one as a smaller one, and a long one as a much longer like line of light. So that's a neon pulse. Let me try also different brightnesses. You can see that the black is literally invisible, like the light. So you can really make a range of light coming through. Cell vinyl. So this is probably one of my favorites, honestly, because it gives let me put a background, because it's hard to understand without a background. So let's put this white background. Where's this cell vinyl? Let's go with green. Here you can see there's a black outside, a thick black outside line with a very basic inner color. So if you read what I said, a simple bland color and black outline, as I said. And this is actually called cell shading, which is often like in cartoons. It's often used in cartoons. So you can imagine maybe like, I don't know, a stick man. Like you can imagine this sort of art style is very it's a different style. It's a very unique style. And although very simple, it really stands out with the black outside edges. So you can really make shapes stand out. And I believe it's a non-reflective one as well. So here you can see the difference between the greens there's no difference. So there's no reflection. Okay, next one's Hypergrid. Let me make this smaller. Oops. Hypergrid. So this is a very interesting one because it creates shapes. So generally it creates shapes in this wherever you draw in a sphere of that. But what's unique is that those shapes are only triangles. And if you fill them in more, they don't overlap. They create more triangles. Well, they do overlap to make it brighter, as you can see there, but they don't really overlap. Mainly, they just make more triangles into each other, which therefore create these sort of cubes and then sometimes X's inside, if you see. So this, for example, a good idea would be, you would need to be careful as to how you use it, but if you would be like this, very careful, like you can create like certain shapes. And if you go over it more and more and more and more, then it becomes more like the shape you want it to be. But I think I find it quite hard to be accurate. But yeah, this is a very unique one as well. How it creates shapes in different areas. So the next one is called Lightwire. And this, you can see so basically it's like Christmas lights, okay? So it blinks from the beginning to the end between the lights. The lights are obviously affected by the color. So here you can see it's very black. Like the colors are very dark. They don't glow at all. And they're generally also very faded, like they're orangey. They're not very strong colors, like the greens and the blues and the reds. Now, for example, a bright one is really illuminating, and that's a very unique one. Like not a lot of brushes illuminate this much when it glows. So that's an interesting aspect. And this wire connecting them also slightly changes in color, as you could just see there. Let me show you again. You can see it's like a dark red, and it's always the dark version of what you pick. And last, I wanted to say the distance between the things. Obviously, it's depending on how big your brush is, but it always stays the same. So it's not like an uneven spread of lights. Now the last two, chromatic wave. So this is a very unique one because there's really three different ways you can use it. So there's this main version. Let me explain this one first, which is just going in loops, so spherical loops, in a wavy pattern, like a sine wave. And yeah, this is a lot of waves, and many, like there's usually 1 to 3 lines, or like there can be up to, you'll see later, but there can be a lot of lines, or there can be just one. And they also pinch on the ends, and yeah, it's just a constant animation going forwards, as if like a wave's moving. And now what's interesting is, if you have very dark one, first of all, it spreads out the waves a lot. I did make it smaller, but I think it does. It looks like it spreads out because it's only one wave. And second of all, it's just one wave, and it's very simple. It's very dark and simple compared to this one. It doesn't illuminate, obviously, because it's black. But yeah, and this one just sort of wiggles against each other, whereas this one looks more like, although I think it is technically doing the same thing, it looks more as if it's moving forwards. And then the last version of this is the really bright one, which is just a crazy chromatic like style of this, where there's loads of different colors. Like right now this is a red, but because it's so bright it acts as white. So it's putting basically all colors in the color wheel together, like loads of colors, or the main colors, and in a loop. As you can see, the loop is consistent. There's some empty areas in the sphere, you would say. But yeah, it's a very strong light, and very very strong, with a consistent, very fast motion. Yeah, so usually, let's go, these are the technical terms. So usually the brush color, let's say you picked more of an abstract color like pink, and you would go with a quite bright version. Usually the pink would be predominant, is the name. However, it would be predominant. However, there would be usually chromatic colors with it. Chromatic colors are the strongest colors, from I think mainly like red and blue. And you can see that in here. There's red, blue, and like sort of a bit of green/yellow. And then overall it sort of looks like pink, if you had to describe it overall. Dots. So this is the last one, and it's a very simple one. First of all, it creates an even spread of dots, which illuminate depending on your brightness of the brush. And they do have a range of illumination, so it's not all of them are not the same illumination. Here you can see one which is very faded out. And here let's give an example of quite a dark version. It's not that different. Very dark makes a big difference. Here you can see it doesn't illuminate as much, whereas the really bright one is the opposite and almost looks white now. Well, you can see here why, if you go a maximum brightness, it makes sense that there's no pink anymore, because it's actually just white if you look on this side. Like here it's slightly pink and here it's just white. So that's the end of this brushes 3 panel. Soon I'll be getting on to the next one. Thank you for listening.